Hey everyone, welcome back to the Reclamation Podcast, where our goal is to help you reclaim good practices for faith and life. I'm Tony, and today is episode 145 of the podcast, where I sit down with one of my dear friends, Jason Moore. Jason and I have known each other for over a decade, and he shares with us today his insight into both and worship. What does it mean to reconvene the church and our hearts as we turn towards Jesus in this unprecedented time of the church? I think you're going to love this conversation. And remember, our goal is that through intentional conversation, we can help you unpack a deeper relationship with God. So, hey, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to podcasts, leave a rating or review on iTunes or Spotify, and maybe even share this episode with a friend. If you want to check out the show notes or the full transcripts, go to reclamationpodcast.com. Now, without any further ado, here's my conversation with Jason Moore. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm excited today to have one of my friends for the last 10 years. We've been friends a decade, man. That's hard to believe. Jason
Crazy.
Moore, founder, president, CEO, visionary for Midnight Oil Productions. Jason, thank you so much for being, well, first of all, a repeat offender here on the podcast.
Hey, it is my pleasure to be back.
Now, Jason, your calling, as you think about it with the larger church, I was trying to write out all the things that you do. And I'm like, well, he's on the district staff and he speaks at churches and he coaches and he does hidden worship and he does the hybrid worship stuff, which we're going to get into today. How do you describe your calling when somebody says, what is it that you do?
You know, that is a really complex question. And my business card is an 11 by 17 sheet of paper so that I can list all of the various things that I do. I often call myself author, speaker, worship coach, and consultant. So that's probably the short of it. But I do a little bit of everything. And in addition to all of that, really where I got my start was in doing media production. I'm a graphic artist, motion graphics guy, you know, that kind of thing. So I do a little bit of everything.
What do you, when you think about what God has placed on your heart, like the burden that you carry for the local church, how do you often describe that to pastors or to neighbors who may not understand the full church dynamic?
Sure, absolutely. For me, I really believe that Jesus Christ is the hope of the world and the answer. And I think that my experience has been that in the church, we don't always communicate the gospel in a way that makes that message attractive to people who encounter it, you know, so people who didn't grow up in the church or have no church history. So my passion is helping churches communicate the gospel in deep and meaningful ways that drives people deeper in their personal faith development and toward mission in the world. And so I don't think of worship as the only door. I just think of it as the front door to deeper discipleship and missional participation. So my neighbors probably wouldn't understand that, but my dream as a kid was to go to Hollywood and make movies, and then Jesus got a hold of me, and I shifted my gifts toward helping the church learn how to communicate more effectively.
Yeah, we had Stephen Kendrick on the podcast, and he said a similar thing, that it started out of this kind of internal passion to tell stories, and then it kind of grew into this ministry. And I feel like you're kind of in a similar boat. Now it's interesting, right? Like worship has kind of always been one of your bread and butter spots, following your career like I have. But when COVID hit, your world changed because so much of who you were was about going to churches. How many times do you think you traveled in 2019?
Probably about 40, 45 trips to do either consultations, or a lot of it was doing my creative worship seminar, which was all about it was all about in person. I didn't really talk much at all about online back in those days. Or I do a lot around hospitality. So I have a training called 5 Things Your Visitors Are Thinking But Won't Ask. And lots of frequent flyer miles in 2019.
And then 2020 comes along, and and what happens to you, right? Like what do
Oh,
you do with a consultant who is like, you're just like, well, that's one less bill I'm gonna have to pay, or what do you? I mean, what was that
yeah, yeah.
experience like for you?
Oh man, it was terrifying. I had two thoughts. The first thought was completely wrong. I remember saying to my kids, "You're going to remember this 2 weeks for the rest of your life," because they were closing school down, right? And because of people being sick and all that. So my first thought was, "Oh, this is just going to be a no big deal thing." And then maybe 3 weeks into the pandemic, 6 different events that I was supposed to go do canceled. I got calls, hey, we can't bring you out. The wonderful thing about the relationships I developed over the years is, and the fact that I'm in ministry, is that almost all 6 of those said, we're going to go ahead and pay you anyway, and you can make it up when this thing is over. It's not over. But I ended up shifting some things online. So I had this terrifying conversation with my wife. I said, I don't know what we're going to do. I have no clue what we're going to do to make income, because so much of what I do is I go in person and I do trainings and consultant stuff and all of that. And one of my friends who is a pastor in Denver had brought me out, and actually, I think in August of 2019, to do a secret worshiper consultation, and then I did a training for his conference. And he called me the day that the church shut down, the day the world shut down. They said, you can't be in your buildings anymore. And he's like, Jason, we implemented all the stuff you told us to do when you came to be with us, but now we're online. What can you watch our online service? Because that's the only way people can experience what we do, and secret worship it for us. And I was like, sure, yeah, I'll be happy to do that. I honestly didn't have anything else going on. So, and so I watched that worship, and I took 2 full pages, 8.5 by 11, of notes about things I thought, both things that were good, but things that really needed to be done differently if we're only online. And so I shared that feedback with that pastor. And in reading the notes, I said, his name's Jeremy. I said, Jeremy, man, so much of what I'm sharing with you here, I'm seeing in all these churches that just jumped online. Would you care if I put together just a little article about this, and I'll make you anonymous? And he's like, oh yeah, sure, go ahead. And so I posted that article on Facebook, and within one day, I had one of the United Methodist annual conferences, the Susquehanna Conference in Pennsylvania, Harrisburg area, reach out to me and say, hey, could you turn that into a webinar? And I'm like, I've never done a webinar. I mean, I participated in a webinar, but I've never led one. And so I said, well, let me play around and see what I can learn. And maybe, yes, I don't know, probably. And the very next day, West Virginia called and said, hey, we saw that article you did. Could you do a training for us on that? And I was like, well, I'm working on it. And, over the course of the next several days, I started working on this. In fact, you were a part of it. Yep. You helped me do a little bit of work on the handbook, and within 5 days, 14 annual conferences all over the country hired me to do this training. That training was called Telling the Old Story in a New Time, and it was all about how to do just online worship. But at the root of kind of your bigger question, I felt like God was providing manna for me in this season. And it wasn't me. It was totally a Holy Spirit thing. I didn't have this idea. I just showed up, and it was on the beach one day, and I started collecting it. And what's happened as a result of those things has just been an incredible God journey for the last couple of years, as that training has morphed into other trainings, other opportunities, a lot of coaching and consulting and so on. But yeah, it went from terrifying to feeling God's presence in maybe the deepest way I've ever felt in my career, because I've been completely dependent on God. Should always be there, but in the last 2 years,
right.
I didn't have a plan for what to do, and God showed up. So that's kind of my story.
Well, one of the things I'm curious about it is you talked about relationships, and I know that you're a big relational guy. I'm curious, how much do you think the relationships that you've had for the last, decade or so, have prepared you for this moment? Because it wasn't like, you weren't a stranger to those places,
Yeah.
right? You've been obedient to what God's called you to for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
What does it look like for you to intentionally develop community? Because I think that's something you're pretty good at.
That is one of the most important things, I think, for any entrepreneur to think about is the relationships, the people you invest in. Those first two calls were conferences that I've done a ton of work for. In fact, I was on retainer with the Susquehanna conference for multiple years. And that's why they were aware of what I was doing. So one of my friends that was on the conference staff there saw on my Facebook page this article I posted, and then he reached out to me. What happened? What's been incredible is this is like that old cheesy camp song, "Pass it on, only takes a spark to get a fire going."
Yeah.
Those
Sing that for us. No, I'm
relationships.
just kidding.
But those relationships, what happened is once I did, a handful of these trainings, people started talking to other people and vouching for me, and their relationships played in to what was happening for me. And in fact, one of the things that I really believe about the ministry that we're doing today, and in fact, what I talk about in this new book, is that at the heart of everything we do, it's not about technology. It really is about relationships and building meaningful relationships. And I feel like one of the dangers of this world we find ourselves in, and in hybrid worship and in online worship, is that we are not intentional enough about building relationships. Our online worship can be a revolving door where people come in and leave, and we don't ever even know who entered or who left. And so I'm a big proponent. One of the things I've been harping on a lot in my consulting work is encouraging churches to build a discipleship pathway, or I might call it a relational pathway. Those relationships are both with our community, but also with God. And if we don't do that, I feel like people will tune in, watch, and leave, and all of that. So relationships are really kind of at the heart of, I think, all that we do in ministry, and certainly have been one of the keys to any kind of success I've had over the last couple of years are in those relationships.
So I know you to be a fairly innovative guy, and you've done a lot of things. You pivoted multiple times in your career, and just the time that I've known you, you've pivoted. How do you know when God is pushing you to your next yes? Right? When's the? Like for a while, you were doing incredible trailers and books and book trailers and all this different kind of work and like those kind of things, and you pivoted and this latest expression of your ministry is another pivot. What's your relationship with God like, and how you acknowledge that yes, this pivot is from God, or versus no, this is just me trying to be I don't know, greedy or gassy or whatever, right? Like,
sure. Well, to go back to what we talked about even in the last question, I think for me, part of it is relationships and what other people are hearing and seeing and in conversation. You and I know each other well enough that we both are talkers, and we both. I don't know about you, but for me, sometimes I will be talking to someone and my innermost feelings are revealed even to me in that moment. And sometimes when I've been going through some of these pivots, I will be talking about how I'm feeling about something, or I'll be listening to a close friend or a mentor, and God is revealed in the conversation. God's plan is revealed in that conversation, and all of that. Of course, there's a lot of prayer. When you're self-employed, there's a lot of prayer in your life. Probably not enough at times, but when in each pivot for me, you step in, you give something a shot, you fake it till you make it, and sometimes you don't make it. But God sends these little confirmations all along the way. I'll tell you that 2020, I did that first training, and by the end of the year, I had done, I don't know, 28 of them or something. And I thought, wow, that was an incredible ride. It's over now. Boy, I'll remember this forever. And I was in conversation with a ecumenical leader. And so this ecumenical leader wanted to book a training based on another book I wrote right as the pandemic began. And in our conversation, he said, hey, how is your telling the old story in a new time thing going? And I said, oh, it's going well. I said, but the problem is I keep coming up with new stuff and I can't fit it all into what I had. And I said, my big concern is what's going to happen when we start to go back to the room, because that whole training was about online or socially distanced worship. How do you do that?
Sure.
And so I shared about 3 things with him that I had been thinking about. He's like, I want a training on that. And I had just offhandedly said, we've got to figure out how to do worship in a both and sort of way. And he was like, I'll book 2 of them right now. Can you do it in November? And I didn't have any clue that was coming, but it's a relationship thing. I have done multiple trainings for these folks. They, I think, feel pretty confident about my abilities to communicate. And I think my material is helpful for people. But it was in that conversation that God revealed something to me that I didn't even know was there, and saying, here's just some thoughts I have. And he said, he recognized it. That's a training and I want it and I need it. And so I feel like when you surround yourself with incredible people and you invest in relationships, at least for me, I don't as often hear that small, still voice, when I'm out in nature or, praying in the morning that God says, hey, go develop a seminar. Instead, for me, it's sometimes just in those relationships and trusted voices in my life.
No, I think that's really good. I think there's probably a lot of people who relate to that and can think about their community. And one of the things that I know is that you've intentionally developed this community. It's not that you love to meet new people. And so you're out there and you give fully. So, you mentioned the word spark, and you kind of sparked this whole fire with the telling the news, new story. I got it mixed up, but the conference you did 28 times, yes. And then the both and ministry that you're doing now, this really has been like wildfire. As I watch, you're doing more than you ever have. You're busier than you ever have. What's your kind of feelings on how do you properly steward what God is bringing you now? Like, how do you both remain grateful, hungry, and content all at the same time? It feels like a lot to manage.
It is. Part of it is just being grateful and just being reminded, or reminding yourself constantly of where you were at on that day that 6 things canceled, and where you're at today, where I have 5 retainer relationships with annual conferences. Last year, I got to actively coach 175 pastors. I was leading 16 cohort calls a month. And, that is not something, I am so grateful for that. And then there are days where today is a 5 Zoom call day. I had five appointments. I've got another training I'm doing tonight. I do get a little tired, but then I just kind of stop and think, thank God that I'm this busy, thank God that I'm this tired because there have been other moments. There was a year that I went through some transition in ministry. Midnight Oil, my ministry was, I was a partner, and I bought my partner out, Lynn Wilson. I was basically buying him out and also trying to do some things and feeling a little depressed in seeing a ministry fall apart, or not fall apart, but break up. I've been working. I'd been working with Len for 13 years, and we had a fairly lean year as far as income for me because I was buying someone out as a monthly sort of thing. And I remember that year, going through some old boxed up Star Wars toys that I had and wrapping them up as Christmas presents for kids because we didn't have as much to spend that year on Christmas. And so, moments like what I'm living through now, where I'm busier than ever. I try to remember those moments where it was like, I don't know how we're going to even make ends meet this month. And the reality is I don't know how long this wave lasts. So, we have tried to just in our own personal situation, pay off debt and invest in the right things and all of that. So
Nothing but Bitcoin, right?
exactly right. No, I clicked on one too many cryptocurrency articles, so every time I open anything, I get little Bitcoin ads everywhere. I don't own any. I'm really curious. I've got a neighbor who's really into it, but I've not invested anything there.
I love it. Well, and it reminds me of, the years of feast and the years of famine in scripture. And we see that. And I think one of the things that you do well is you steward what you have when you have it. And you remain obedient in both cases. So let's talk a little bit about this new resource that you have coming out. It's a brand new book, Both and Maximizing Hybrid Worship for an In-Person and Online Engagement. Now, obviously that's the full official title, but it's really just both and, right? And so give us kind of the idea of the crux of this resource, because you're talking about two things that in the church world and for a lot of us can feel very different. And I think what you're saying is they're both different and they're both equally important.
I think that's probably a fair characterization. I think that one of the upsides of the pandemic, and there are plenty of downsides,
sure,
was that it forced the church to move when the church hasn't moved in a long time in some ways. And one of the ways that it forced us to move was online and to connect with more people. The very first passage in the book is quoting the Great Commission, that we are to take the gospel to all people, baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And we have to figure out the baptizing in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit online, because you can't, that's more of a physical thing. But it's the reason I call it both and. I really believe that we have this incredible opportunity, maybe the best opportunity in my lifetime, to reach more people with the gospel, because we are now offering worship in a way that anybody can connect. People that wouldn't walk into a physical building, people who are not in our zip code or not in our neighborhood. But the both and piece of this whole puzzle for me is that we cannot just deliver the experience. We cannot create the experience that was in the room and simply put a camera in the back and go about business as usual and expect that to translate to those online. And so we have to create an experience that is, I think, equally for the people in the room, both the people in the room and the people at home, which means we have to reimagine the experience a bit. One of my favorite examples that I share both in the book and in the training that I do is to think about professional sporting events.
Yeah.
There's a difference between going to the game. I saw that you were at the Bengals playoff game. Did you get to go? Were you at the playoff?
I was at the Chiefs game when the Bengals destroyed the Kansas City Chiefs.
Okay, all right.
Fans out there, especially my friend Jeff Cartwright, they destroyed the Chiefs and made the playoffs and then won the playoffs. Go Bengals. Keep going.
There you go. I just knew you had Bengals on. I couldn't remember which game it was at, and you were at the game. The experience at the game is different than the experience at home. You have a different sort of energy when you're with that crowd. You've got the sights, the sounds, the smells, the beer and the hot dogs, all that stuff that you don't have when you're at home. But at home, you don't have to deal with crowds and parking and disgusting restrooms, and the snacks are cheaper, and you have commentators that will explain what's happening and instant replay, but it's the same game. The game is playing out in real time for both of those groups. And there are people at the stadium that are dedicated to giving you a great experience. The ushers, the vendors, the person playing charge on the organ or whatever. I don't know if they do that at football games, but at home, you've got the commentators and all those things. And so it's one thing that's being delivered in a both and way. I think for some of us, we have not really reimagined worship. And so we're creating an experience where more or less what we're doing is the people at home are an afterthought, and we without really meaning to, turn them into spectators or to observers of an experience they're not really a part of. So the thrust of the book, the training, is to help churches think about how do you create participation and engagement for people both online and at home. I say we've got to get away from the language watching worship. We don't want to say, if you're watching at home today, we want them to worship at home, not watch at home.
Yeah.
And some folks have had a real struggle with this idea of hybrid, that you can't, if you're not in the physical space, it's not really worship. But I remind them that Paul's ministry was a hybrid ministry. All throughout Acts, Paul is preaching to the people in person. Sure. But so much of our theology today is based on these epistles, these letters that were written distanced, apart. And all throughout Paul's writings, he's constantly saying, I wish we were together. I wish we were in person. I wish I could embrace you. But we don't discount that as somehow less than because Paul wasn't physically in the same space. And I really believe if we're intentional, we can create transcendent expressions of worship through a both-and approach.
Hey guys, just pausing this conversation with Jason to remind you about the Spirit and Truth Conference. That's right. We've been talking about it for a while now, and we're just over a month away. I want you to be in Dayton, Ohio, March 17th through the 19th, as we kick off the Spirit and Truth Conference. Now, this conference will feel a little bit more like a camp meeting. Speakers from all over the world will be there, and I'm so excited to breathe a little life into you, the church leader, the pastor, the follower of Christ. So go to spiritandtruth.life/conference. And hey, when you check out, put the promo code RECLAMATION in to save a little money, our gift from us to you. I'm so excited for the conference, and I hope to see you in Dayton, Ohio, March 17th through the 19th. For more information, check out spiritandtruth.life. Now, let's continue this conversation with Jason.
Now, for all of my traditionalists out there who are feeling very uncomfortable right now, let me just go ahead and ask the question on their behalf.
Yes.
Are you saying that it's okay for someone to only do online worship?
Personally, I am not a proponent of only online worship, but I don't think we should discount what God can do through online worship. I'll tell you, there was a church I visited back in August, my favorite church to talk about. They're called Journey Church in Columbia, South Carolina, Pastor George Ashford. And George, it's a large African-American church. I think he said pre-pandemic, they were around 600 or so. I don't know if that was membership or attendance or whatever. But he said, in my community, in the African-American community, we have not been quick to get vaccinated. We have some negative history with allowing people to stick things in our arms that we don't know what they are and so on. So he said, I've got a congregation that's 80% online, 20% in person. And so I had to figure out, how do you do church when you're going to do it in that way? And in the African-American tradition, call and response is a really important aspect of worship. So when the pastor preaches, the people participate. They yell things out. There's a dialogue that happens. And so he had to really think about, how are you going to do worship in that way? And so there are a few things that I took from this experience. I'm actually, I'm really excited. I'm going to be flying to Columbia and working with them again this weekend. And I can't wait to see what I pick up from them this time. But when I was with them on that day, there were about 4 things that I think are great takeaways when it comes to both and. The first captures 3 of them, and that is that they have what they call the Amen section that is at the front of their church, 3 high top tables that have little laminated cards that say social media ambassador on those 3 tables. And so they have servants that sit at those tables, and their job is to be like the online greeter, or just they encourage participation. So I opened the chat during worship because I wanted to see what they were doing. So every single person that came into the chat got a welcome. Every time they made a comment, there was a response. There were always hearts and likes. And people were fully engaged throughout that. The second thing they did is they had a whiteboard behind them, and they actually wrote on the whiteboard attendance in the moment on that board. So it started off with 30, and they erased it, became 50, became 80. I think it went all the way up into the 130s. That's 130 households which allowed the people in the room to be aware of the people not in the room, so they felt a connection in that way. And the third thing that happened, and this was my favorite, and why I think they call them the amen section, is that sometimes people would put in comments like, preach it, Brother Ashford, and someone from one of those tables would yell out the comment that somebody at home made. So they got to be full participants. That meant that the pastor was aware by looking at that board of who was there, by listening to the comments that were coming out, and so on. So those were three of the things. The fourth thing that I really appreciated, and I think for any of our traditionalists out there, this one is very helpful, and why I'm a proponent of both and, not either or, is that after worship, it was a communion Sunday. After worship, I walked out of the building and there was a line of cars, probably 30 cars long, there to receive communion that day. So these people worshiped online, and they pulled up in their car, and communion stewards were there with masks and gloves and all of that. But they would go to, as the car would pull under the awning, they'd give them their elements, they'd receive communion. So they were full participants in the online experience. And then they came to the building to experience the sacraments. I know when it comes to sacraments, there's a lot of different points of view. I know some folks are saying, hey, grab bread and juice or water or whatever, and you can participate today. I know other churches that are like pre-blessing elements and saying it's a communion week next week, stop by the church and pick up your elements. For me, it's not, I don't want to tell you what the theology should be around that. I think we all have to wrestle with that on our own. But we do have to remember that people want to engage in the full life of the church. So don't just make your communion, hey, when you came in today, you received a packet. Well, no, when I walked into my living room and turned the TV on, no one gave me a communion packet today to participate. So how do we engage them in all of those ways?
So obviously this is a lot for a very a difficult institution that doesn't really like change, the church, right? And so what I appreciate about your approach is that you're not saying that one is better than the other. You're not saying that one is worse than the other. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I hear you saying is, hey, let's just be intentional in the relationship building on both sides, and however it fits into your theology, correct? I mean, is that too much of a simplification?
No, I think you more or less have captured it. Anyone who has heard me talk in the last few years last couple of years have heard me say this, but I really believe we've got to stop ranking our congregation in terms of importance by where they sit. You're not most important if you sit in the front. You're not more important in the front than if you sit in the back. You're not more important if you sit on the ground level than in the balcony. And you're not less important if you're sitting at home than you are in the room. If you're there one week and you don't feel well the next week and you worship from home, your value doesn't go down 50% in the kingdom of God in a faith community. And so I think actually one of the churches I coach, a pastor named Marilyn Weiler, said this in one of her sermons when I was secret worshiping. And I just loved it. She said, we've got to bring dignity and respect to our entire congregation, which means, and she was telling the people in the room this, sometimes I'm going to look right at the camera and talk to people at home. I'm going to ask questions sometimes that people at home might give a response, and I might read it off my phone because they matter just as much as the people in the room. And so it doesn't matter if you are doing high church liturgical worship, or if you're doing the most modern worship of all, if you're a large church, if you're a small church, none of that matters. And even your theological bent, whether you're on the conservative side or the progressive side or whatever, it's really just about bringing dignity and respect to our entire congregation. And I guess the last thing I would say is that if we're trying to reach new people, we want to be inclusive enough in our language that they can understand and come to know what we have come to know a long time ago. So walking people into our rituals, helping them understand the meaning of things when we say things like sacrament or Eucharist or even things like Connect card. Like if I'm online and you say, fill out your Connect card, a card is a piece of paper. I don't have a piece of paper in my living room when I'm watching on my TV. I don't even know what you mean when you say that. So it's that. It's also our language gives us away sometimes. So we're really bad, I think, sometimes in the church about saying, let's all stand together for the reading of the word. Well, do you really think people in their living room are standing up when you say that? So I like to say, if you're here in the room with us, let's stand together. Or if you're worshiping at home, find a posture that will allow you to fully participate in this moment. Just acknowledging that they're there, I think, is what invites them into relationship, both with our churches, but also with God through the worship that we are doing in this present time.
So I think there are a lot of people who have taken to online worship as the primary means of which they now commune with a religious community because of the pandemic, right? And I know a lot of people aren't going back. It feels like that was true when I was pastoring, and it's even more true now as I work with pastors. I don't think attendance is going to go back to in person. I'm curious, what are you telling pastors when it comes to measuring? Period. When it comes to measuring, right? Like attendance, you and I both know, right? And I've done a lot of online ministry with you and just myself over the years, right? Like an online view is, number wise, one for one, can't be counted the same as an in-person. Mm-hmm. We're not talking about paying attention. I am kind of the opinion that attendance no longer is a valuable metric. I'd be curious what your thoughts on that are and what you're telling people.
Well, I think it's a great question, and it's the question that a lot of people are asking. And I think the reason a lot of people are asking, at least in the tribe that I work with the most, the United Methodist Church, is that they've got to fill out reports on attendance and all that, and they don't know how to count it.
Let's podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Let's just be honest, though, that butts and seats has never, equated disciples. I could go to the gym every single day and sit on a bench and not do any exercise whatsoever, but watch other people,
right?
Watch the instructors and not benefit at all from what I'm experiencing. So just because someone shows up in the room doesn't mean they're living out any of what we're talking about.
Sure.
So I think, and I said this a little bit a moment ago, but developing a discipleship pathway, I think, is key to how we measure what we're doing. I also think that in one of the questions I've been asking pastors a lot over this last couple of years, and especially in my coaching, is how's it going? And people always tell me the in-person numbers. Oh, we only have like 40% of our people back. And I'll say, well, how's it going online? Oh, our online numbers are good. Well, how's your giving? Oh, it's steady. And what we've got to rewire our brains a little bit, because we seem to think that only people in the room matter. And that's just not true. The people online, if they're fully participating, and I think that offering is a good indicator. I don't invest in something that doesn't mean something to me, or that I don't have some level of involvement in. So one of the suggestions I've been making, and this is also in the book, is that churches bring back the concept of the hymn board. I don't know if you remember the old hymn board.
Oh yeah. In the Catholic church I grew up in, it was the stats, man.
Yes. So we would always they would have the hymn numbers, but would also have last week's attendance, and it would have last week's offering on it. I would suggest to any church that's struggling with morale, or who doesn't know how to measure, that you start telling tell the whole story, not just the story of the people in the room. So I would encourage churches to think about looking at the numbers from Sunday when worship is over until Saturday night before worship begins, and put those up on your quote hymn board, your digital hymn board, if you're going to put that on the screen. Tell the story of the offering. Your people in the room don't have access to that stuff, and they just look around and see there aren't very many people here, or as many people as there used to be. So I think we have to help people see everyone. I also think that we need to measure what's happening in our discipleship opportunities. How many people are coming to Bible study or involved in small groups? Or I think that's maybe a better indicator of the health of our church than how many people show up in a room and sit there. So for me, it would be a combination of people participating in mission, people participating in Bible study and small groups, giving, and then attendance in the room and online. That's how I would really see it. And I guess my final thought on just attendance patterns these days. I just actually had a coaching call right before our conversation today, and I had a pastor kind of lamenting what was happening with attendance and especially children's ministry. Everyone's trying to figure out, like, how do you get kids to come back to Sunday school? And the reality is, and a bit of our time when we were living in the same city, we would do some workout stuff together. I was never as good as you at P90X, but
oh man, the
getting up at an ungodly hour and doing that. But the reality is that when you are doing something like that, when you get in the rhythm of it, you don't want to get out of the rhythm. So it's hard on the first day. And it's hard on the second day. But, when we were in that rhythm and, it was like we're doing it 3 days a week, and I didn't want to miss because I was in the rhythm of it. But if you miss a day and then you miss 2 days, you're like, well, I'll start next week. And then next week, I'm busy. I'll start the week after that. And once you get out of the rhythm, it is so much harder to get back in the rhythm. Same with dieting. It's like once you get in the rhythm of it, you want to stay in it. And I think with some folks, they've had 2 years out of the rhythm of going to church or going to Sunday school or whatever. And it's easier to grab my cup of coffee and sit in my PJs and surf Facebook while I'm watching. Maybe I'm not worshiping. I'm just watching worship on TV. So I think we've got to start to think about, how do we re-engage people in that rhythm? And it may mean doing more event-based. Like, I think people have a longing for connection right now. They miss being together, but you may have to make things a little special. So maybe, and I'm just spitballing here, maybe it's that you do, a bigger Sunday school thing twice a month, not every week, just to get people back in the rhythm, and you increase the frequency of that until you gotta
walk alongside them, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. So things have definitely changed in the way, and I know that it's really hard for us to wrap our heads around. I have another pastor friend who was lamenting to me in a phone call a couple of weeks ago. He was telling me about his daughter who in 2020 started college and had to start online. And in 2021, campuses opened back up, and he's like, "Are you ready? You ready to go live the college experience?" And his daughter was like, "Why would I do that? I can stay here with my family and eat out of your refrigerator and not have to leave all my friends, and I don't have to spend as much money." And she could not wrap her head around what the value of the in-person experience was, because she only knew the online experience. And we all grew up in the in-person experience and can't wrap our heads around how someone could have a meaningful experience in a living room or, in a hotel room or whatever it might be. So it's rewiring our brains. And I think it's also kind of lamenting that change has happened, and we've got to get used to that thought.
Well, and I think one of the realities is your metaphor about being about the sports is a great one that really parallels the church pretty closely, because one of the things that I hear from pastors a lot, and I'm sure you do too, is this lament about the attendance. But it's not because we overly care about attendance, right? But I didn't, and most pastors I know didn't get into this to be in a room that feels dead.
Yeah.
And whether or not, that's nobody's fault, that's nobody to blame, right? But just like the athletes say, man, it's different when the fans are here. Like, it's a different energy. It's a different energy. And that, I think that is a tension as we approach this stuff that we're going to have to deal with, and that every pastor, myself included, when I was pastoring local church, have to wrestle with. Man, not having people here hurts my heart.
Yes.
And because I want the body to connect. Now, I want the body to connect online too, right? But I want the body to connect with me in person here, right? Like, it sounds so needy, but it's a very real. I mean, I guess there has to be a reason why Jesus came in person. He could have done everything from a cloud, right? Like, he could have thrown lightning bolts and healed people or whatever, right? Like, I'm getting my gods mixed up, but I'm being funny. I know my theology's sound, guys. It's fine. It's a joke. But like, there's
I
a
knew that
reason.
you were into Greek gods and stuff, man.
Right. It's fine. There's a reason Jesus came in person, because it does feel different, but we can't throw away the online.
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
another passage I've or part of what I've talked about in Scripture is that before the Holy Spirit, you had to go to the temple, and then the Holy Spirit on Pentecost arrived and resides in all of us, and so we don't have to go to a place to experience God.
That's right.
It's funny because for we used to talk a lot about how the church is not the building. In fact, Tony, when we started working together at your former church, your tagline was "Church without walls."
That's right.
We've put that to the test, haven't we?
We have. We have.
And I mean, as somebody who makes my living, a large percentage of my living as a speaker, man, I miss standing on a stage in front of 150 people and listening to them laugh or watch those aha moments or whatever. I mean, it's been a huge shift for me to have to watch chat or watch in a Zoom room, people nod, and it's so different. I would take in person all day long over online, but I have also heard great stories about transformation and the way this has opened the gospel up to people.
Yeah, that's right.
Who wouldn't walk into a physical church. I had I could share story after story, but we cannot. One of the big one of the things I hear a lot about worship from critics about online worship is that it's not embodied worship, that we're not physically in the presence and all of that. And in the book, I share an article, I think from a Catholic professor, a woman who talks about how you have to have an embodied experience to worship online as well. You have to have your fingers to touch the keyboard. You have to have your eyes to see it. You have to have your ears to hear it. And she actually shared that when she said, for me, it allows me to have an even fuller body experience because I would like to dance during the Gloria Patri. But if I did that in the Catholic Church, they take me out of there in a white jacket that zips in the back. So again, I'm not a proponent of either or. I really do think that we need to be in person. We need to be both and. One last thing I'll say here is that I am working with the church in North Carolina who told me a story about how someone was so engaged in their online worship that they drove from Tallahassee up to North Carolina to join the church. They're not moving to North Carolina, but they joined the church and they are participating through tithes and offering and online worship and Bible study. But then they have found ways to get involved in their local area in mission and other opportunities like that. So it's a different way of thinking. We've got to wrap our heads around it. And I would just say that for folks who say relationships can't be real if they're online, you probably haven't been paying all that much attention to social media because I know more about what's going on in your life right now because we're friends on Facebook than when we lived in the same city and we saw each other regularly.
Sure.
That doesn't mean I know that we have the same level of intimacy in a relationship that we would, but there is a real connection that is there.
I love it. And I think more than anything, it's just important for the church to recognize that it requires some intentionality if we want to build the relationship. And a attractional church, I believe, is on its last leg. Like attractional church is not going to be the thing that brings a whole bunch of people in, but relational church could be. And this is,
yes,
it's really what I hear you saying. And I appreciate that. Jason, I know that my listeners are going to want to pick up a copy of the book. They're going to want to follow you and learn more about your ministry. Where's the best place to A, get the book and B, follow you on all the interwebs?
Sure. Well, they can get the book. In fact, we have a special code for listeners of the podcast at inviteresources.com. And this is a little complicated, but I want you to think both and BA special 10. except for B, A, and S, the first letter of special. B, A, and S are all capital. BAS, all capital. BAS special 10 will get you 10% off of.
Oh, that's great. Love that. We'll link to that in the show notes too. We'll link to invite resources, and I'll make sure we get the code in there so you don't have to overthink it too much. If you're on the treadmill right now or driving, don't worry about writing it down. I got you covered. It's in the show notes.
There you go. And then I'm at Midnight Oil Productions, or PROD, on Twitter, although I don't tweet. But you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/Midnight Oil Productions, and also on Instagram at Instagram.com/Midnight Oil, at Midnight Oil Productions. Goodness, I'm not very good at.
That's fine. We're going to link to all of it in the show notes. You know, you're almost too relational to be online.
There you go.
Okay, so last question I always love to ask people, and you know this because you've listened to the podcast before, but it's an advice question, except I get to name the day and time where you get to go back and give yourself one piece of advice. And so what I would like to do is I would like to take you back to your first day as a solopreneur at Midnight Oil Productions. You've bought out your other partner. It's just you and literally burning the midnight oil, because I know that's when you do most of your great creative work.
Yeah.
If you could go back all those years ago, look yourself in the eye and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
Believe in yourself. And know that it is going to be okay. In those days, after having been a partner for so long, I didn't know if I had anything of value for anyone, because I'd been tied to someone else, and I had lots and lots of doubts. And gosh, God has done things well beyond my greatest imaginings of what could be. So I would tell myself that.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And I'm thankful for your time today, man, your generosity, and for your friendship over the years. It always means a lot to me. And I love the fact that we get to connect and what God's doing in your life.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm proud of you and what you've done through the podcast. I remember when you were just talking about it, and you've come so far, and grateful for your friendship too. So thanks for the chance to be on the podcast.
I told you guys, what a great conversation. I love Jason's heart. I love how he's wired. I just love his intentionality around online and in-person worship. Jason's been walking alongside the local church for decades, and his expertise has been such a help to so many. As always, friends, I'm extremely thankful for the opportunity to gather with you today. I hope that this conversation was a gift to you and helps you grow a little closer to Christ. Also, remember, if you want to follow Jesus, you must be willing to move.